For 40 years, KEI has been promoting dialogue and understanding between the U.S. and the Republic of Korea. And with Korea's emergence as a global leader in trade, diplomacy, culture, and other fields, KEI's efforts to inform American policymakers and the public about the deep ties between the U.S. and the Korean Peninsula has never been more critical. To help advance understanding between the United States and the Republic of Korea, KEI produces research and analysis on the Korean Peninsula from both leading and up-and-coming scholars, academia, and the general public. We also go beyond the Beltway, engaging with communities across the United States. We have held events in cities such as Atlanta, Indianapolis, San Antonio, and San Francisco, often with senior diplomats like the U.S. Ambassador to Korea, to discuss current events and how the two countries are navigating shared challenges. With Americans and Koreans alike working together to deliver a safer, healthier, and more peaceful world, our efforts to connect relevant voices from both countries has never been more important.
Today, on January 13th, we celebrate Korean American Day. It is a day set by Congress back in 2005 by unanimous consent to honor and celebrate Korean Americans and the many contributions they make to the United States. KEI is proud to have celebrated Korean American Day every year since 2008 and highlight the impact made by Korean Americans in every arena of American life, including the arts, education, sports, entrepreneurship, philanthropy, science, health, and civic leadership. A key part of KEI's mission is promoting cultural understanding between the United States and the Republic of Korea, all the while preparing the next generation of global citizens and our country's future leaders.
Hello, I'm Kathleen Stevens. Thank you for joining us to mark Korean American Day, which falls on January 13th each year. This is the 15th year that KEI has celebrated Korean American Day. And we do it, this year as always, by recognizing and learning from the work of inspiring Korean American leaders. It's always a great way to start the year, and though we wish we were doing it in person this year, as we usher in this year of the Tiger, I think this year's virtual gathering has a very special meaning. KEI's mission for 40 years has been to promote greater knowledge and understanding of the Republic of Korea and of the US-Korea relationship. I personally have witnessed over the past 40 years plus South Korea's extraordinary rise and the ever-deepening relationship between the US and Korea. The modern story of Korean immigration to the United States and the shaping of the Korean American community is a related story, but a distinct and equally compelling one. This year, as in previous years, we seek not only to honor individual leaders, but to highlight the extraordinary diversity of engagement and contribution to American life of Korean Americans across our country in a range of fields and activities. The past year has been tough. COVID-19 is not the only sickness that has challenged our communities. The viruses of hatred, disinformation, and distrust have also infected them. The appalling upsurge in anti-Asian violence and racism cannot be ignored or wished away. What to do? How to engage? Sometimes it seems it's harder than ever. That's why I'm so inspired by our two honorees this year. Miss Grace Kim is a lifelong teacher and community activist. In the 1970s, in San Francisco, she co-founded the Chol Soo Lee Defense Committee to help a Korean immigrant wrongfully convicted of murder. This was an early and pioneering Asian American movement for justice. And just last year, in 2021, she organized a solidarity rally at the Leisure World Seal Beach retirement community when a Korean American widow living there received hate mail. And in all those decades in between, She's done a whole lot more, as you will hear directly from her in conversation shortly. Dr. Paul Song is a medical doctor and a longtime healthcare activist, as well as the co-founder and CEO of Fuse Biotherapeutics. Addressing the problems in access to the US healthcare system is more salient than ever, and Dr. Song has been at work on it. He brings a lifetime of commitment and expertise to it, and I look forward to his insights today. As you will see and hear today, Grace Kim and Paul Song are extraordinary individuals. They inspire all of us to do something to make not only our own communities, but our country, our world, better. They exemplify the kind of engagement, energy, expertise Korean Americans throughout the United States of all generations are bringing to the most pressing challenges of our time. I know you will enjoy meeting Ms. Kim and Dr. Song, at least virtually for now, and that as we honor them, we can also be inspired by their examples. Welcome. It's now my honor to introduce the Honorable Grace Meng, Congresswoman from New York. Congresswoman Grace Meng is serving her 5th term in the US House of Representatives. She represents the 6th Congressional District of New York, which encompasses the New York City borough of Queens, including West, Central, and Northeast Queens. She is the first, and rather astonishingly to me, only Asian American member of Congress from New York State. She is the vice chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, and she is one of the most active and effective voices on Asian American Pacific Islanders issues in the Congress. She was the main sponsor of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which President signed into law in May 2021. And she has introduced legislation for making and teaching and learning of Asian American history mandatory as part of US history, and also establishing a National Asian American Museum in the United States. She is also deeply interested in Korean issues and has introduced and pushed for the Divided Families Reunification Act, HR 826, a bipartisan bill that seeks to help Korean American families reunite with their families in North Korea. Congresswoman Meng, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do. We look forward to your remarks.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Grace Meng from New York, and it's a pleasure to join the Korea Economic Institute of America in commemorating Korean American Day. In 2005, Congress passed a resolution establishing this annual observance, which is marked each year on January 13th. And since 2008, KEI has organized a well-attended celebration to shine a light on the extraordinary work of Korean Americans, and I thank them for continuing to do so, even though we're gathering virtually. 119 years ago, Koreans arrived on U.S. shores, and since that time, Korean Americans have enriched every facet of American society. Whether in the entertainment industry, politics, or academia, whether in medicine, sports, or even as an astronaut in outer space, Korean Americans have made and continue to make so many outstanding contributions to our country. In my congressional district in Queens, I'm proud to represent such an exceptional and vibrant Korean American community. It is a wonderful and hardworking community that continues to improve our neighborhoods, grow the economy, and enhance New York City and the nation. In Congress, I'm continuing to lead efforts that would reunite Korean Americans with loved ones in North Korea. This issue has been a top priority of mine, and I will continue to do all I can to facilitate these reunions as soon as possible. I'm also continuing to support efforts that strengthen the critical ties between the U.S. and South Korea and the cooperation we share on so many issues of mutual concern. As we all know, the past year has continued to be a difficult and painful time for Asian Americans. Those of Asian descent have been blamed and scapegoated for the COVID-19 pandemic, and as a result have been forced to endure a surge in hate and violence. But I'm hopeful that better days are ahead for the Asian American community. In May, President Biden signed my COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law, and I look forward to the law helping to combat this ongoing bigotry and racist attacks. We must also address the biases against Asian Americans at its roots, breaking down the stereotypes and negative perceptions that for generations have existed about our community. That's why I'm pushing legislation to promote the teaching of Asian Pacific American history in our schools to ensure that our future generations learn about our past and how Asian Americans helped America grow and prosper. And that includes the achievements and experiences of Korean Americans, like Korean American Day. In addition, I'm fighting to create the first national museum dedicated to preserving the history, culture, and accomplishments of APAs so that our stories and contributions to this country are properly documented, preserved, and acknowledged. Fighting for issues that matter to Korean Americans is personal to me. After all, my husband's Korean American and my sons are Korean American. Again, I want to thank KEI for continuing to hold its annual Korean American Day celebration. I'm proud to join you in highlighting the crucial role that Korean Americans play in our country. Thanks for inviting me to say a few words. Congratulations to the honorees, and thanks again to KEI for the great work it does. Best wishes for an enjoyable event and much continued success. Thank you, and please stay safe and healthy.
Tonight, we have a case of justice finally done in San Francisco when angry citizens worked for years to free a man wrongfully convicted of murder.
So 5 years, we really worked hard. We had meetings almost every night. Choice came out in 1983 as an innocent, free person. It's such a exciting, unforgettable movement, and we won.
Tensions between a small group of white students and a small group of Vietnamese students boiled over.
We have to speak up and then work together.
No more racism and discrimination. We will outnumber.
$29 million people will remain uninsured in the United States. 3 million people will remain uninsured in California, of which 350,000 of these are children. When I started advocating about 20 years ago, I was very much in the minority. I just realized that I needed to use my position as a physician to speak out and to really start to get involved in trying to transform our healthcare system. If anything, the first 150 million people that were vaccinated here in the United States showed how a single payer system really could work, and that you didn't have to worry about dealing with an insurance company. You just went in and got your vaccine. And wouldn't it be nice if all of our healthcare system was just like that?
As one of the country's top Asian American doctors, when you hear the president talk about a term like Chinese flu or Kung flu from the White House, what goes through your mind?
The amount of racism that is being stoked about that towards not just Chinese, but all Asian Americans, because to some people we still all just look alike, is no small amount. And there's a lot of hate crimes that are already being perpetrated in the United States. This is why I think we need more activists within the Korean American community, not just to speak out on issues for us, but just for the greater good.
Good evening or good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you so much for tuning in today as we celebrate KEI's 15th Korean American Day. My name is Meng Kim, Director of Public Affairs at KEI, and I'll be moderating the conversation with two of our distinguished honorees for this year. It's always a pleasure meeting and learning about different Korean American leaders, and it's also very inspiring to learn how much work they have done, how many different type of work they have done in the past. So this year, I am very honored to have Ms. Grace Kim and Dr. Paul Song to talk about their work and their dedication to bring changes to the justice system in the United States and also healthcare system in the United States. So Ms. Kim and Dr. Song, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Great to be here.
Right. So I wish the pandemic has ended and we will be able to meet in person, but I think this is the best we can do given the current situation. So we'll make this as interactive as possible, and we would love to hear your thoughts on different issues, and also, going back to things that are happening today. We've learned a little bit about you in the videos before, but I would like to have a deeper conversation about your views and your perspective and experience. To start off, I'm really interested in how you got started and where you were involved. So I think it's one thing to be interested in an issue, but another thing to take active action, and especially for both of you, you've been working on for years on. So how did you first get involved with the issue? So for Grace, how did you first hear or get involved on the Church to Lead movement? And then later for Paul, how did you get involved with the healthcare system? So Grace, off to you.
We lived in Davis, California for 36 years. And my husband is a psychiatrist, so he was working at the UC Davis Medical School. And I was teaching at the senior high school in Davis. And my husband went to San Francisco, Chinatown every weekend because there were Asian American Mental Health Community Service Center by second, third generation Asian Americans. So he was there helping as a consultant. And then he met all second, third generation Korean American like Tom Kim and the Japanese American like Ranko Yamada. She became lawyer after that experience. So one day I invited all of them, second, third generation, for dinner, swimming party and dinner. We had lots of fun. And then they asked us, have you heard about the Chorsley case? We did not know. So what happened? So they explained that he's in prison right now and looks like a mistaken identity. And then nobody helped him. So we have to do something. So I said, all right, tell us more about that. So they told us all the story, exactly what happened. So we said, all right, let's do something. We cannot just ignore this. Innocent people are going to die. And he received the death sentence. And so that's the way we started. And then I asked the JU, who just graduated from UC Davis Law School, and then K.W. Lee, well-known journalist from Sacramento. So we discussed about this. They all agreed that let's organize defense committee. All right. So I asked all Sacramento Korean American friends and the Davis Korean American friends. They all came. There was 1978. This incident happened in 1973. So already Charles was in prison. So we discussed, we organized National Defense Committee. And then then KW started writing the newspaper. He's a powerful writer. So then young Korean American and the Asian American college students were so moved by that article. Then they all joined. They all organized in their own university, East Coast and the West Coast. So we contacted them, let's get together, organize National Defense Committee for Charles Lee. So we worked for 5 years, and the fundraising and the hiring top-notch lawyers. And also, I'm a member of the Presbyterian Church USA. So we got the first fund from there. And the United Methodist Church also gave us fund. And then we started to do fundraising. We visited the JU, and I visited all Korean American churches, talked about Charles Lee case. Then we made $200,000. So with that, we were able to hire lawyers. So that's how we started. And that was the most amazing, historical, multicultural, multi-religious, multiracial, grassroots activity. So 5 years, we really worked hard. We had meetings almost every night. And then we won. It's such a exciting, unforgettable movement, and we won. Charles came out in 1983 as an innocent, free person. And after that, we learned that, okay, from now on, when something happens, we can do that. So we developed the confidence. Then right after that, Vince Chin case came out. So we worked, but unfortunately, we could not win.
There was no social media, right? So you must have really, on your foot, really visited all different places and talking to churches. That's a lot more work compared to, today, where we can, post things on social media if people find out about it. So thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll go into more details on your reflection on the event. And I would like to turn to Paul and would like to hear how you got started in advocating for healthcare when you were a physician, advocating for insurance and stuff. So please, Paul.
Well, again, thank you for allowing me to be here. I'm a radiation oncologist by training, so I've been treating cancer patients now for over 25 years, and probably about 2 or 3 years into my practice, I was actually practicing in Northern Virginia. I started to see more and more of my patients who had cancer, who had done the right things, were insured, going bankrupt strictly because they developed cancer. And I saw this especially, which was hit home to me, was a Korean elderly man who had a small business of his own and then developed stomach cancer. And despite the fact that he had worked hard his whole life, had to choose between being able to pay for treatment or perhaps selling his house that he had worked so hard to achieve. So I started to really research what was wrong with our system. How could a system where you do everything right still hurt you when you got ill? And I started to realize that our system was not as great as everyone made it out to be. At the same time, I had family members who, I have an uncle who's a pastor, and when he developed stomach cancer, he found he couldn't go to the local hospital because he couldn't afford it based on the type of insurance he had. And it was easier for him to pay for a plane ticket to fly to Korea, to have the surgery there and to have the treatment and come back than it would have been for him to have the treatment here in the United States. And fortunately, he was lucky enough to do that. But for the tens of thousands of people here in the United States who are stuck in a system and don't have the luxury of doing that, many of them either do not get the care that they need because they can't afford it, or after they do get the care are left in financial ruins. So I started to realize that the system really was not the optimal system and was not working for patients. It was not working for the majority of people, and started to really advocate for a more moral, just system that really put patients ahead of profits and that really advocated for the least among us. And I think that unfortunately, we've still had a system that is controlled too much by special interests, the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the big hospitals. And it's very easy for patients to get lost in the process. And here in the United States, we have, I think, an apartheid system, meaning we have a system that is inherently segregated and racist. If you look at the patients who take Medi-Cal or Medicaid, which is really for the real poor, many of them are from disadvantaged communities. And even with that coverage, very few doctors or hospitals will see them. So they can take months to years to get the type of treatment that they need. And at that point, particularly in the cancer field, it may be too late. So I just realized that I needed to use my position as a physician to speak out and to really start to get involved in trying to transform our healthcare system.
You pointed out the comparison between the American healthcare system and South Korean healthcare system, right? I mean, I've seen many cases, even among my friends, you know, as small as LASIK, getting eye LASIK surgery, they would rather go to Korea, and it's because it's cheaper overall, even with the plane ticket round trip. So, I mean, there's been a lot. We've been talking about healthcare for such a long time, but unfortunately, we're not seeing the changes fast enough. And thank you for keep bringing attention and also advocating for you know, healthcare for everyone. So my next question is, I'm sure both of you have, you know, talked to many different people. Oftentimes, you know, people have different views. Some people will support your ideas, or some people are against the ideas, or, you know, some people are, you know, very harsh about, you know, pushing for one idea or the other. So what has been your experience in terms of talking to people with different views from different backgrounds, and how do we continue that dialogue and discussion in order to bring about change? So Grace, we'll start with you.
Especially, I realized that the Korean American people feel that when something happens, well, just let them go. Don't get up and speak up. Be quiet. Recently, in this retirement community, one hate letter came to Korean family. So right away, I called all the Korean American Association people and organized a rally. Then several people, first generation ministers and those leaders called me, Grace, don't do that. Just keep quiet. It will go away. So I said, no, not anymore. We have to stand up and speak up. And they said, somebody might hurt you. No, that's okay. I lived 90 years. What do I afraid of? So we organized, and really 500 people came, 10 speakers. And then we made a picket and 1 week demonstration. Of course, we could not find this person who wrote the hate letter. My purpose was educating us and them both, or whole community, through this kind of activity. And that worked, because the people learned so much through these activities. So I guess we have to really, especially Korean American people, do not want to speak up. So I said, we have to.
I just have to commend Mrs. Kim for doing that, because I know growing up, when I was facing a lot of racial teasing as a kid, my father was just put your head down, work hard, and ignore it. But I think the time of us being a silent minority is no more, and we have to speak up. And I applaud Mrs. Kim for taking on people and really encouraging people to speak up, because we can no longer stand silent. So it's really wonderful to hear that. And next time you have a rally, please let me know, because I'll drive down and be there.
Okay.
And my wife too. For me in healthcare, it was a little bit tricky, because as a specialist, it's very unusual for specialists to care about this issue. They're very much enjoying their nice lifestyle and nice income. If you look at the majority of the medical community, it's usually pediatricians, primary care physicians that are much more in favor of this, and the specialists tend to be very quiet. So when I started to really be outspoken on this and go on the local news, go on Larry King to really speak on this, I got a lot of negative feedback from some of the doctors I work with. But I really knew in my heart that I couldn't go to work every day and see my patients and just turn a blind eye. So it is one of those things where when I started advocating about 20 years ago, I was very much in the minority. What you're seeing now is the sea change, particularly as you see new young doctors who come in who are much more socially aware and caring about a greater good than themselves. And so I found my community with this whole new generation of doctors who really are in it for the right reasons. But when I started to first speak out 20 years ago, you had a lot of doctors who, many of them were my dad's friends, who were like, what are you talking about? Why can't you just be quiet? But I just felt like this was really the right thing to speak out on.
You know, when I was teaching in Davis High School, white student killed one Vietnamese student. And after that, I said at the staff meeting, we have to do something. This is a really educational opportunity for all of us. So right away, we organized a Human Relations Committee, and then we made a memorial for this student. And then 1 week teacher training, because teachers need to learn. They didn't have any idea what about those racism or hate crime kind of thing. So we had workshops for a whole week, including parents and then students, teachers. So when I started at the Human Relations Committee, all other schools organized the Human Relations Committee. So I went to help them to organize. And the city of Davis also organized the Human Relations Committee. That was really amazing. And so they realized all about racism and the hate crime, learned through that, then continued every year. We had the same workshops and event. We didn't stop.
That's great. And like what Grace said about speaking up, I think that's something I keep telling myself too, but I think that's also important because I mean, how long do we keep the science? How long do we keep our head down when things are still happening continuously and something needs to be done, right? So I really agree with Grace's point. And also on education, I think education is something that is also very important. And like you said, we need to learn, we have to educate ourselves, others, in order for us to, you know, say that that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. And it starts with school too, right? So that's absolutely very important. This actually flows nicely into my next question. I do want to get your thoughts on the current event. So unfortunately, with the pandemic, obviously everyone was having a hard time, you know, physically, mentally, also the economy as well. Things were tough for everyone, but we also saw a spike in the rise of violence against Asians. So for you, Grace, I wanted to get your thoughts on all the things that you've seen from Church Lee's movement in the 70s, 80s to throughout your life. What are some of the things that are the same, unfortunately, or things have changed, and what are some of the things that we still need to work on as a society? And the same for Paul as well.
Actually that the hate crime against Asian Pacific American people started by Trump. He said what did he say? Asian virus, when coronavirus came out. So he was the one really started that. So because of that, hate crime against AAPI started. So when we had rally here, we talked about that and shared, and the people agreed. Trump made a big mistake, and we have to do something about it. We have to always stand up and speak out.
I think what's really sad for me is, so I was a middle school kid. Actually, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. And at the time, very few people even knew what Korea was, even though there was a Korean War. So people would either tease me as, are you Chinese or Japanese? And I never thought my own kids would face the same type of racial taunts that I did, 50 years ago. But the reality is, it also shows you how little we were taught about how Asians were treated in this country in our high school curriculum, right? When you look at the internment of the Japanese during World War II, the Chinese Exclusion Act, all of these events have always showed that there has been this racist bias against Asians in the United States, despite the fact that we've been such strong contributors to the community to help build this country to what it is. And I think what was really interesting for me was to see all of these people learn about our past, collective Asian past, that we had never heard of. Mrs. Kim talked about Vincent Chin. It was amazing how many second generation Asian Americans never heard of Vincent Chin. And yet that was such a similar event to what happened, right? He was scapegoated because of all the cars being built in Japan, and they thought he was Japanese, and he got beaten up and killed at a bar. None of us never learned these stories when we were growing up, and it was never part of the curriculum. And so I think what this has been is a real awakening for our community. It's been a way when you see people that could easily be my mom or someone's grandmother being viciously attacked just because of the way they look. When you see my wife got a lot of hate mail and letters, go back to China, I hope your kids get the Kung flu. When she did a story on the health situation, it just really exposed, to be honest, I think we were naive to think that all of that racial bias had gone away. It just was under the surface, and Trump allowed it to reemerge. But what I think has been so wonderful is you have people like Mrs. Kim who've been here using their experience and platform to really organize and bring people to speak out against this. You see a whole generation of people that are learning about their history. Now, a lot of states have passed curriculum requirements that we have to learn about Asian history in high school. So I think as painful as this has been, and it's still painful because there's still continued violence against Asians, that we as a community have come closer together, realized our political power, we're speaking out more, demanding more, and at the same time, bringing about changes to finally get the recognition to our history and identity that maybe we never learned about. So it's been really awful, the experiences that some of my family members have experienced, but I think it's still been a positive in that I think we all feel connected in a way we've never felt connected before.
And in Davis, after this Vietnamese student was killed, we organized a special committee, Multicultural Education Committee. So we started a new curriculum, multicultural education. And also we developed so many different programs to teach students and the faculty learn about this country. This country is a country of immigration and a multicultural country. So we need to know each other, learn about the different cultures, and so that we can understand better. Our life will be more enriched because of that. So we had a very active multicultural education program in Davis. And Friendship Day was organized so that all students came all day with me and had an all-day program learning about the other culture and how to have a relationship with different people. And that, I guess that was really worked. So we organized the new curriculum.
Absolutely. And on the Trump comments, so even though, obviously we have a different president, but the after effects of what happened during and after about that comment, it still lingers today. So that really shows an importance of, political leaders' comments or things they say, or their role in the society and how people see things. So there's definitely an importance on that. And Grace, you touch upon the friendship and relationship building. So I think that's also something that we need today, right? We need to build coalitions and allies that can support each other, and for Korean Americans as well. And then Korean Americans also need to support other groups so that it's, mutual friendship, allyship, right?
I just want to say, again, I am just so wowed by Mrs. Kim and what she's been able to do. My grandfather, he grew up under the Japanese occupation, and when he was finishing high school, he didn't want to work in the Japanese system. So he actually came to California and worked as a migrant farmer in the Central Valley for 3 years, made enough money to then go back and buy land and build his own farm because he never wanted to have to rely on the Japanese for anything. My mom recalls there would be lines sometimes and you would see the Japanese citizens in Korea getting meat, whereas the Koreans would be given horse meat, or the Japanese would get rice and the Koreans would get like barley. So my grandfather said, you know what, I'm gonna never rely on the Japanese as long as we're under Japanese rule, and have this farm and raise my own family off that. And then after there was independence, my grandfather was elected to Congress, and he was the person that was led to the commission to basically prosecute what we call the Chinilpa, the Koreans that were sympathetic to the Japanese and had profited mightily at the hands of their fellow Koreans. And he was leading that commission when some of the people in Syngman Rhee's administration didn't like him and tried to assassinate him. But my grandfather always had this history of speaking out for justice. He became the first popularly elected mayor of Seoul. But then the coup d'etat came, and then he would refuse to basically endorse Park Chung-hee and the Korean CIA. So he lived the rest of his life in exile in the United States, but he always spoke out for the Korea that he believed in, which was democracy, caring for one another. And unfortunately, he never was allowed to return to Korea until after he passed away. But I learned so much from watching his activism and just what he stood for. And, it's really unfortunate that I think as the country has evolved and grown, and I'm talking about now Korea, they've forgotten a lot of their history as well. And it's my hope that, we can continue to educate like Mrs. Kim is doing. I think I would love to learn more about the history project and curriculum you've developed, because there's so much richness there. And I know that there was the exile community in Shanghai, but there was that first Koreatown here in Riverside, California. And I think that these are the stories that we need to really not let die, that we have to continue to educate and bring these to the forefront, because it really adds to the richness of the whole Korean American experience. And I'm just so grateful to Mrs. Kim for doing all of the work she's been doing.
What is your grandfather's name?
Kim Sang-don.
Oh, oh my goodness. I met him.
I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure you being as active as you are, you probably were very close. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so he spent the last years of his life in Southern California, really protesting against Chunduan and all of the policies of the Korean government. Kim Jong-pil, who was the head of the Korean CIA, used to really try to get him to not be so tough on the government, come back to Korea, but he just refused. And
he was a real activist.
Yes.
He was a fighter.
Yeah. He fought to the very end. And he used to take his bicycle and just pick up cans and collect the cans to raise money for all the families that were incarcerated under Park Chung-hee and Chunduan, to try to really help their families survive. But I know he would have been, I know obviously he met you and you, but he would be so proud of the work you're doing too. So that was my mother's father. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
But this is why I think we need more activists within the Korean American community, not just to speak out on issues for us, but just for the greater good. And, I think Mrs. Kim's example of all the things that she's been doing really can help make our society stronger. Just when she talked about the student being killed at her high school and wanting to address that and to help build bridges rather than just let it just pass as a one-off. If we had been more proactive as a society, I think we could have use that and roll that out throughout the state of California, but nationally, to reduce the amount of violence that's happening still in schools today. We just are not doing that. So I'm just, the more I learn about Mrs. Kim and the things, I knew some of the work you did, but on that front, those are the tangible things that on a day-to-day basis can make such a difference in the lives of our kids and in the future generations. So thank you for doing all of that as well.
We have to continue to educate and organize. Whenever something happens, we cannot be quiet.
Yes.
No, no way.
Absolutely. So thank you both of you for the work, and it's such inspiring to hear both of your stories, and it also makes me want to be involved and speak out and do something if something happens. So thank you both for everything that you've done. So I want to go back to the families. That's been talking about a lot about family, and I think a lot of our views and perception on things develop with the family, right? It's how we were how we remember seeing our parents act to certain people, or how we were taught certain things to, our experience. And within Korean American community, I feel like sometimes there's different views and perspectives depending on the generation, right? Whether or also depending on when they came to the United States. For example, like my parents see things might be different than what I see because we have different views and different experiences. To being a different exposure as well. So for you, Grace and Paul, what influence did you have from your family? We obviously talked about your parents, and Paul, I would love to hear more about your mother and her influence on you, your view. I would love to hear your views on that.
My mother was a very assertive lady. She graduated from Pyongyang Women's Seminary, church leader. Anyway, when we lived in Shanghai, one of my Japanese teacher, because we all had to go to Japanese school. So this young teacher, male teacher, called me Cho Sanjing. There's a put down name of Korean. So I went home and I talked to my mother. Next day, she dressed up with a Chinese dress and then went to school. Talked to the principal. if you don't fire that teacher, I'm going to write a letter to emperor. The principal was so shocked. What happened? So she explained. He said he just right away on the floor bowed to my mother. Please forgive me. Please forgive us. We will never do that again. So he called this teacher. What did you do? You have to apologize to this lady. So he did. I'm not going to use that kind of language again. So both of them were so shook up. And so that's what I learned from my mother. You don't just ignore when you see unjust thing. You have to fight for justice.
I just want to say one thing along those lines. So my dad's family, my dad was born in Pyongyang. His family is multi-generational Pyongyang, and his grandmother was an elder at the at the Yongnak church that was there. And everyone thinks Seoul was the epicenter of Korea, but Pyongyang for the longest time was the place. And what was really interesting about that is when you look at the history, women played a prominent role in society in Pyongyang. A lot of them were elders in churches. A lot of them were the business people that were very successful and quite wealthy. It was really a place where I think women were treated as equals and many times excelled more so than their male counterparts. So I can see how Mrs. Kim's mom, when she went to China, was raised in an environment where she could just speak and be strong, because that's the way my dad's mom and my dad's grandmothers, they were all that way. So that's really, I think, something that's so unique to Pyongyang about that time. You know, my mom really was just by real God's love and grace that she was able to come to the United States. So my mom's older sister, she was 4 years older, always wanted to come to the United States to go to college. But my grandfather, he really was an honest, poor politician, never took a dime, nothing. He said, there's no way we could ever afford to send you to the United States. But he said, and you need to learn English. So he went to my aunt went to Yonsei University and met the Underwood family. So the Underwoods were the family that founded Yonsei University. And Mrs. Underwood, she asked Mrs. Underwood, would you please teach me English? And Mrs. Underwood said, okay, if you come every day for 1 hour before school and 1 hour after school, I'll teach you English. So every morning she'd ride her bicycle and Mrs. Underwood would teach her. So for 2.5 years, my aunt would go and learn English. And about 2 years before the Korean War, the communists came down and assassinated Mrs. Underwood. And the Presbyterian Church in the United States set up a scholarship for one Korean student to come to the United States to go to college. And that was my aunt. So because my aunt spoke very good English, and when the Korean War hit, she was asked to speak to a lot of community groups, churches, anybody about what is Korea, what's the life like there. And it's during that time that she they asked about her family, and they said, oh, they're refugees in Busan. And my sister wanted to start college, but she has not been able to. And it's only because of that, when she was speaking to this church group, that the church put together enough money to have her come to the United States and go to college. But one thing that my grandfather always told my aunt and my mom was, you are going to come back and help rebuild your country. You're never going to stay there. So focus on things that can help your country. So my mom really focused on early childhood education and Head Start because she thought of Korea as a poor inner city. And it was during her sort of student teaching while she was at Columbia that she met Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African-American woman elected to Congress. And Miss Chisholm actually hired my mom. But if it was not for the coup d'etat, my mom would be back helping to build inner city schools in Seoul. But she ended up staying there. But she was always very outspoken about helping really disadvantaged communities. So my mom spent 30 years running the Head Start program in Newark, New Jersey. and used to take my sister and I down to the city, Newark, when we were young, whenever we had free time. She wanted us to see the burned out buildings. She wanted us to see that the kids there were no different than us, other than we were just born with a lot more possessions and fortune, but that we were the same. And I think was so important for my mom to share to all of us growing up. So I really owe a lot of our opening our eyes to a greater world, and also especially those that are just the same as us, but we're disadvantaged for reasons that were not in their control. So, but I think it goes back to these strong women, Mrs. Kim, my mom, Mrs. Kim's mom, my grandmothers. They were real forces of nature, and I don't think anyone wanted to mess with them.
Where is your mom now?
She's here in Los Angeles. My dad passed away 10 years ago, and she moved here. She lives 2 blocks from us. So every night she's over for dinner with my kids, and I would love for you guys to meet one day.
We should get together.
Yeah,
because I was a Yolo County Head Start director.
Oh my goodness, this is amazing. Yeah. So she was the educational director at Head Start for Newark, New Jersey for 25 years. I would love that, Mrs. Kim. That would be great. And you're her 1 year older. So yes, this is so much in common there. And I know. Probably might have met my mom's older sister because she was much more active in politics than, because she was here in California, and she was 5'10", so she was very tall.
Did she go to Yongnak Church?
Yeah.
Me too. I went to Yongnak Church in Korea.
Oh yeah, and then my uncle, who I mentioned, who had the stomach surgery, he was an engineer, but then he was an elder at Yongnak here in Los Angeles, then went back to seminary, and then became a pastor. But yeah, so we have strong ties to Yongnak. But after the COVID comes down a lot, I would love to bring my mom and take you to lunch.
Let's get together. Yeah,
it'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I would invite all of you for lunch.
This is so exciting. I'm so happy that Grace will meet Paul's mother, Grace Kim. So you have to send us a picture when you actually do meet. And here's KEI bringing Korean American communities together. And this is what we do, and right. So I'm really excited to hear more about how both of the strong Korean mothers will meet, and I'm sure they have a lot to discuss. So that's very exciting. So my next question is, I want to talk about, we've touched upon this a little bit, but I want to ask you, what does being a Korean American mean to you personally?
When I was in Buffalo, right after I got married, at the church, one lady came to me and said, "What is your last name?" So I said, "Kim." "Oh, is that a Korean name?" "Yes, my husband's last name is Kim." She said, "Oh, I thought you married to U.S. serviceman." So I said, from that on, whenever I went someplace, I introduced myself. My name is Grace Kim. I'm a high school teacher, and my husband is Luke Kim. He's a psychiatrist, and we came from Korea. We are Korean Americans. I was really assertive. Before they asked me, I introduced myself. And I love to be Korean American. We are bicultural, bilingual. We have a better understanding of different race and the culture, more sensitive about the different culture, appreciate the different culture. So I'm glad. So as a Korean American, I have lots of opportunity to introduce Korean history and Korean culture and the value system. So I'm glad I can do that.
I will just say, because I was born here, and my family was not allowed to actually go to Korea until the 1990s because of the political situation. My parents could never get a visa to go back to visit. So I didn't really have any direct interaction with the country for a long time. And grew up in areas that really didn't have many Asians for a long period of time. But I always felt that I didn't quite fit in 100% or wasn't fully accepted in society because I was the only one that looked like me in my high school. And I think as I got older, I really started to want to learn more about Korean history, the Korean American experience, my family history, and really became much prouder about that. And I think it really completed me as who I am. So as I raise my two daughters with my wife, we really want to let them understand the full richness of what all the cultures that they have, and to be proud of it, and to really publicly stand up on it, versus maybe when I was growing up, I was just trying to fit in, right? And so I think it's really been an opportunity that I've been just growing. I will say though that when I talk to my mom and others from her generation, there's certain parts they don't really like to talk about. For the longest time, my dad never wanted to talk about the war, and neither did my mom. And you can see that there were certain emotional scars that were left from the war. And I think that now, as we've gotten older, and particularly as my mom gets later on, I really am trying to draw out those stories. And it's painful still to this point. But I think, again, for us to fully understand what it means to be Korean American, really, we need to understand the hardships of what they endured, both under the Japanese occupation, which was brutal, but also the Korean War. And then for those that were in Korea after the war, just the destruction and poverty and just chaos. But most Korean Americans just don't want to talk about that because it was too painful for them. But I think for our generation, we need to learn that, because it should give us a deeper appreciation of everything that our ancestors endured and how lucky we are to have what we have now. So my hope is that we will see more people talk about it. So I try to draw that out from my mom more and more now. And matter of fact, right before Christmas, we were talking about some of those stories that she had never told me about. And it was still raw and painful as if it just happened. But I think that that's really important.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more on Paul's point about importance of learning history. So I mean, Korea has different place in the world now. People in the United States are familiar with Korean pop culture, Korean drama. So they are learning more about Korea, but I think it is also important for them and for us to keep learning about the history of Korea, the country itself too, but also the learning and remembering the Korean American history in the United States as well. So I think it's really important for us to, not only continue to educate ourselves, educate others, but also learn about history and about Korean Americans, and also continue to learn about the history of the Korea, the country itself as well. So I think we had a lot of interesting questions, and I would love to talk to you more, but for the interest of time, I think we'll have to end our conversation. But I also want to end with one more question. So if you would like to give advice to anyone who likes to be involved, who likes to fight for a cause, what would you like to tell them, and what other comments would you like to share with our audience today?
Well, always through the dialogue, we can work together. Even if they don't understand what is a Korean American, what is a Korean culture, all that. Also, multicultural country. This country is a multicultural country. So we have to start with the dialogue. Many, many people, some Korean people try to be American, white American. And they feel bad about the Korean American. And so we have to really start with the dialogue and share with the books and workshops. And also I wrote 한국일보 newspaper for 10 years, asked Grace Kim column, because students wrote me letter, said all kinds of conflict with the parents, parent expectation, parents' understanding of this country. So they started writing me letter. So Korea Times newspaper sent to me those students' letters. And then later, parents' letters. That's why I started that weekly column. And later I put them together. It's all Korean newspaper, put them together and published it. But we have to also educate parents.
I will say I am much more optimistic about the future when I meet young people now, especially even Korean American kids. There's such an awareness that they have, and whether it be talking about Black Lives Matter or criminal justice reform or environmental issues or even marriage equality, when I've gone to a lot of these rallies, I see so many Asian kids, and when I especially see Korean American kids there's something that just makes me feel so joyful that they're really getting involved. Because I know when my parents were not adverse to protesting. I mean, certainly when we were kids, we would go out to the UN and carry down with the KCIA signs, but I think they would rather have us studying or focusing on things than going out and doing that. But I see so many more Asian American kids and Korean American kids at these massive rallies, and they seem to just be much more concerned with a greater good than I think my generation was. And I'm very optimistic about the activism I see amongst the Asian American community and the young generation.
Yeah, when I had a rally here, all the young people came from Orange County, Korean American. They made the picket and they came. That was great.
It's great to hear that we're seeing positive signs for changes. And it's also a good to end in a positive note as well. So again, I would really like to thank both Grace and Paul for your time today and sharing your thoughts. And this has been really interesting. And also, I love learning more about different Korean American stories and things people have paved the way for the younger generation in the past. And KEI will continue to find different Korean American leaders for us to also highlight and celebrate and continue this celebration of Korean American Day, which is every January 13th. So thank you so much again, and we'll be in touch. And thank you again for those of you watching online. And you can also watch some of our previous Korean American Day events on our YouTube page. So if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and hit the like button, as it will say. And also don't forget to visit our website, keia.org, for more information on Korea and what's happening in Korea as well. So thank you, both of you, again. And we really hope to see you in person. And we hope that everyone stays safe and healthy, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Nice meeting all of you.
Thank you. And Mrs. Kim, I'll be in touch soon. Okay.
Yes.